Ma'am, you need to move this vehicle immediately or we'll have it towed. I'm standing in my own driveway when the tow truck driver says this. My own driveway on property I've owned for 3 years. Behind him, Brenda Castellano, our HOA president, stands with her arms crossed like she just won the lottery. That vehicle violates our community standards, Daniel. No commercial vehicles in residential driveways, period. The driver looks uncomfortable but reaches for his clipboard. Sir, she says you're in violation of HOA regulations. HOA regulations? My jaw clenches as I reach into my jacket pocket for a business card that's about to make this woman's day significantly worse. What would you do if your HOA tried to enforce rules that don't exist? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up in this mess with Brenda Castellano in the first place. My name's Daniel Chen and I'm 38 years old. I'm a real estate attorney specializing in property disputes and HOA litigation. The irony of what's about to happen isn't lost on me. I drive a Ford F-150 that I use for weekend projects, helping friends move, and hauling materials for the community garden I volunteer at. Nothing fancy, just a basic work truck that happens to have my construction company logo on the door. A side business I run with my brother renovating historic buildings. I moved to Meadowbrook Commons 3 years ago after my divorce. Needed a fresh start, found a nice townhouse with a 2-car garage and a driveway big enough for both my sedan and my truck. The community seemed quiet, well-maintained, perfect for someone who works 60-hour weeks and just wants peace when they get home. For the first 2 years, everything was fine. I kept to myself, paid my HOA dues on time, maintained my property better than most. My grass was always cut, my driveway sealed, my mailbox painted. I even volunteered for the community cleanup days that nobody else wanted to attend. Then Brenda Castellano got elected HOA President in 2022. She moved to Meadowbrook from some gated community in Arizona. A retired real estate agent with too much time and a burning need to control everything within a 5-mile radius. The woman could probably find problems with a perfectly manicured golf course if she looked hard enough. Within 3 months of taking office, she'd rewritten half the community bylaws. Suddenly we needed approval for doormat colors, permission to plant flowers that weren't on the approved species list, written consent to park in our own driveways for more than 48 consecutive hours. The woman turned a simple HOA into her personal fiefdom. I watched her drive out the Hendersons over their solar panels, force the Patels to repaint their front door 3 times because the shade of blue wasn't exactly matching the approved color chart, convince the Architectural Review Committee to reject the Morrisons' deck plans because it would create an unacceptable precedent for outdoor structures. But I kept my head down, focused on work, figured if I didn't make waves she'd leave me alone. I was wrong. It started 6 weeks ago when I parked my truck in my driveway overnight. I'd been at a job site until 9 p.m., was exhausted, and didn't feel like shuffling vehicles to get it into the garage. The next morning, there was a violation notice on my windshield. Commercial vehicle parked in residential driveway. Section 7.3 of Community Standards, $50 fine. I checked the bylaws that night, sitting at my kitchen table with a coffee that had gone cold while I read through page after page of regulations. Section 7.3 prohibited commercial vehicles over 1 ton from being parked in driveways. My truck was a half-ton F-150. Not even close to the weight limit. I emailed Brenda with a polite explanation and a copy of my truck's registration showing the weight classification. Her response came back in less than an hour. The spirit of the rule prohibits any vehicle with commercial markings from being visible in residential areas. Your truck has a business logo. That makes it commercial. Please comply or face escalating fines. The spirit of the rule. Those 4 words told me everything I needed to know about how Brenda interpreted her authority. When the actual rules didn't support her position, she just invented new interpretations. I removed the magnetic signs from my truck doors and thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 2 weeks later, another violation notice. This time for parking a vehicle in my driveway for more than 72 hours without moving it. Apparently, Brenda had been monitoring my driveway with the dedication of someone conducting surveillance for the FBI. I park in my garage during the week and use the driveway on weekends. But according to her records, my truck had been stationary from Friday evening to Monday morning. Violation of the 72-hour rule she'd implemented last month. I checked the meeting minutes from when that rule was supposedly passed. The vote had happened at a special session with only 4 homeowners present out of 83 properties. No quorum, no proper notice, no legitimate authority. But Brenda didn't care about legitimate authority. She cared about control. That's when I started keeping my own records. Photographs of my driveway with timestamps, copies of every email exchange, documentation of every violation notice with notes about why each one was legally questionable. Old habits from law school. Document everything because you never know when you'll need evidence. The 3rd violation came 3 weeks ago and it showed Brenda was escalating. Unapproved modification to property appearance. I'd installed a small shelf next to my front door to hold packages. A simple wooden shelf that matched my house trim perfectly, barely visible from the street. According to Brenda, any exterior modification required Architectural Review Committee approval. The fact that half the neighborhood had similar shelves didn't matter. The fact that the bylaws only required approval for structural changes didn't matter. What mattered was that Brenda had decided I was her new target. I attended the next HOA meeting, held in the community center that smelled like stale coffee and the dreams of people who thought they could reason with petty tyrants. There were maybe 15 homeowners present, most looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Brenda ran the meeting like a corporate board session, complete with a gavel she used with disturbing enthusiasm. When we reached new business, I raised my hand. I'd like to discuss the recent increase in violation notices for minor issues that don't appear to violate the actual bylaws as written. Brenda's smile could have frozen water. Mr. Chen, the board has the authority to interpret and enforce community standards as we see fit. If you disagree with a violation, you can file an appeal with the Architectural Review Committee. I chair that committee. Of course she did. But the bylaws require violations to be based on actual written rules, not personal interpretation. The bylaws give the board broad discretion to maintain community standards and property values. If you don't like how we're running things, you're welcome to run for the board yourself. Next item on the agenda. I left that meeting knowing Brenda had just declared war. You don't dismiss an attorney's legitimate legal concerns and expect them to walk away quietly. That weekend, I did what I do best. I researched, pulled the original Meadowbrook Commons Declaration of Covenants from the county records, reviewed every amendment that had been filed over the past 15 years, cross-referenced the current bylaws against state HOA regulations, and found something beautiful. The current bylaws Brenda was enforcing had never been properly adopted. According to Virginia HOA law, any amendment to community bylaws requires a vote of at least 67% of homeowners. The 2022 amendments Brenda had pushed through, the ones creating all these new restrictions, had been approved by only 32 homeowners, less than 40% of the community. Every violation notice she'd issued based on those amendments was legally meaningless, but I didn't stop there. I pulled Brenda's own property records and found something even more interesting. She'd made extensive modifications to her townhouse without any architectural review approval. A pergola in her backyard, new windows on her second floor, a completely redesigned front landscape. All violations of the very rules she was enforcing against everyone else. By Monday morning, I had a file thick enough to choke a horse and a strategy that would make my law school professors proud. But before I could implement it, Brenda made her biggest mistake yet. Tuesday afternoon, I came home from work to find a tow truck in my driveway and Brenda standing there like she just conquered a small country. That's when she told me to move my truck or watch it get towed for violating commercial vehicle restrictions. And that's when I pulled out my business card and handed it to the tow truck driver. I'm Daniel Chen, real estate attorney specializing in HOA litigation. Before you touch that vehicle, you should know that any attempt to tow it would constitute illegal seizure of property, violation of Virginia Code Section 55.159, and expose you personally to civil liability. The driver looked at my card, then at Brenda, then back at me. Ma'am, I think you need to handle this yourself. He was back in his truck and gone before Brenda could form a coherent sentence. Her face went through several interesting color changes. You can't threaten legal action against community enforcement. I didn't threaten anything. I stated facts. Your violation notices are based on bylaws that were never properly adopted, which makes them unenforceable. You want to tow my truck? Go ahead. I'll have an injunction filed within an hour and a lawsuit for harassment, abuse of authority, and selective enforcement on your desk by Friday. But I'm the HOA president, and I'm an attorney who specializes in suing HOA presidents who abuse their authority. You want to compare credentials? She retreated to her townhouse without another word, but I knew this was far from over. People like Brenda don't surrender easily. They escalate. Wednesday morning brought an email to every homeowner in Meadowbrook Commons. Subject line was Community Standards Enforcement Update. The message was a masterpiece of manipulation. It has come to the board's attention that certain residents are attempting to intimidate community leadership with threats of legal action rather than following proper dispute resolution procedures. This behavior undermines our community's harmony and property values. The board wants to assure all homeowners that we will not be bullied into abandoning our responsibility to maintain standards. She didn't mention my name, but everyone knew exactly who she was talking about. My phone started ringing within an hour. First was Tom Henderson, the guy she'd driven out over solar panels. Daniel, please tell me you're actually going to fight this woman. Everyone's terrified of her, but nobody knows how to push back. Then Sarah Morrison, whose deck plans had been rejected. I've been keeping records of every arbitrary decision she's made. If you need evidence of a pattern, I've got it. By noon, I had calls from 8 different homeowners, all with stories of Brenda's overreach, all asking if there was anything they could do to help. That's when I realized this wasn't just about my truck anymore. This was about an entire community that had been living under someone's petty tyranny because nobody had the tools or knowledge to fight back. Thursday evening, I drafted a letter. Not to Brenda, but to every homeowner in Meadowbrook Commons. I kept it professional, factual, and devastating. It outlined the legal problems with the 2022 bylaw amendments, explained why most recent violation notices were unenforceable, and detailed Brenda's own violations of the rules she claimed to hold sacred. I included copies of the relevant statutes, photos of Brenda's unapproved modifications, and a timeline showing how enforcement had become increasingly arbitrary under her leadership. The final paragraph was my favorite. As a homeowner and an attorney, I believe our community deserves leadership that follows the law rather than personal preference. I'm calling for a special meeting to address the legal deficiencies in our current governance and to vote on whether the current board should continue in their positions. I posted copies on every community bulletin board, emailed it to every address I could find, and hand-delivered it to the homeowners who'd called me earlier in the week. Brenda's response came Friday morning. Another community-wide email, this one with the subject line, false information and community disruption. She accused me of spreading lies, misrepresenting the law, and attempting to create chaos for personal gain. She claimed my letter was full of legal errors and that she'd consulted with the HOA's attorney who confirmed everything the board had done was proper and legal. That last part made me smile, because I knew the HOA's attorney. We'd gone to law school together. I called him Friday afternoon. Marcus, it's Daniel Chen from UVA Law. I'm living in one of your HOA communities and having some issues with the board president. There was a long pause. Meadowbrook Commons? Brenda Castellano. Yeah, Marcus, I haven't talked to Brenda in 3 months. She stopped returning my calls after I told her those bylaw amendments weren't properly adopted. Everything she's been doing since then has been without legal counsel because she didn't like my advice. So when she claimed you confirmed her actions were legal, she was lying. Completely. In fact, I sent her a letter in April specifically warning her that enforcing those amendments could expose the HOA to liability. She never responded. I thanked Marcus and added his information to my file. Brenda had just committed her first provably false statement to the community, not a good look for someone claiming moral authority. The special meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Virginia law requires HOAs to hold special meetings when requested by at least 20% of homeowners. I had signatures from 31 people, well over the threshold. The meeting was packed. 87 people crammed into a community center designed for 50, with the overflow standing in the hallway trying to hear through open doors. Brenda sat at the head table with her board members looking like generals preparing for battle. I sat in the front row with a briefcase full of documents and the calm confidence of someone who'd spent 10 years litigating cases exactly like this. Brenda called the meeting to order with her gavel, that ridiculous prop she used to pretend she had authority. This special meeting was called by Mr. Chen to address concerns about community governance. I want to remind everyone that spreading false information and undermining community leadership can result in violation notices and fines. I stood up before she could continue. Point of order, Brenda. Under Virginia Code Section 55.11816, homeowners have the right to address concerns about HOA governance without threat of retaliation. Any attempt to fine homeowners for exercising their legal rights would be grounds for legal action. She glared at me but backed down. Fine, state your concerns. I walked to the front of the room and connected my laptop to the projector. First slide showed the bylaw amendment voting record from 2022. In November 2022, the board passed extensive amendments to our community bylaws. Those amendments created most of the restrictions that have been enforced over the past year. However, Virginia law requires bylaw amendments to be approved by at least 67% of homeowners. These amendments were approved by only 32 homeowners out of 83 properties. That's 38%. The room erupted in conversation. Brenda banged her gavel like she was trying to break the table. That's a misrepresentation of the law. The board has authority to pass reasonable regulations. I pulled up the next slide showing the relevant statute. This is Virginia Code Section 55.11829. It's very clear. Bylaw amendments require a supermajority vote. Board regulations are different from bylaw amendments. What you passed in 2022 were amendments, not regulations. That makes them unenforceable. My next slide showed photos of Brenda's property modifications. Additionally, enforcement has been selective and arbitrary. The current board president has made extensive modifications to her property without architectural review approval while issuing violation notices to others for similar or lesser modifications. This is her pergola, installed in 2023 without approval. Her new windows installed in 2022 without approval. Her landscaping completed in 2023 without approval. Brenda stood up so fast her chair fell over. This is a personal attack and I won't stand for it. It's documentation of selective enforcement, which is prohibited under Virginia HOA law. You can't enforce rules against others that you ignore yourself. I spent the next 40 minutes walking through every legal problem with Brenda's administration. Improper notice for board meetings, decisions made without quorum, violations issued for non-existent rules, financial expenditures without homeowner approval. By the time I finished, Brenda looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. Tom Henderson stood up from the back of the room. I move that we vote to remove the current board and elect interim leadership to address these legal issues. The motion was seconded immediately. Brenda tried to argue that removal votes required different procedures, but 3 homeowners pulled out copies of the bylaws proving she was wrong. The vote was 71 in favor of removal, 8 opposed, 8 abstaining. Brenda Castellano's reign as HOA president ended with less ceremony than it had begun. The aftermath moved quickly. The interim board, led by Tom Henderson and Sarah Morrison, immediately suspended all violation notices pending legal review. They hired Marcus as proper legal counsel to guide the community through correcting the governance problems, and they asked me to serve on a committee to draft new bylaws that actually complied with Virginia law. Within a month, we'd rescinded the invalid 2022 amendments and returned to the previous, much simpler set of rules. Violation notices that had been issued under Brenda's administration were voided. Fines that had been collected were refunded. The Architectural Review Committee was restructured to include homeowner representatives instead of just board appointees. Brenda tried to fight back with a lawsuit claiming defamation and wrongful removal. It was dismissed within 6 weeks when the judge reviewed the evidence and determined that everything I'd presented at the meeting was factually accurate and legally protected speech. She moved out of Meadowbrook Commons 3 months later, selling her townhouse and relocating to a different community where hopefully she'd learn something about the limits of HOA authority. But I doubt it. Some people never learn. The real changes came gradually in ways that transformed how our community functioned. The Hendersons reinstalled their solar panels without interference. The Morrisons built their deck with approval that took 2 weeks instead of being rejected outright. The Patels painted their door the shade of blue they actually wanted. Sarah Morrison started a community garden that brought together families who'd been avoiding each other during Brenda's administration. Tom Henderson organized monthly social events that focused on building connections instead of enforcing compliance. Kids played in the streets again without parents worrying about noise violation notices. 6 months after that special meeting, we held our first community barbecue under the new administration. Almost every homeowner attended, including families who'd never participated in community events before. People who'd been terrified of Brenda's arbitrary enforcement were finally relaxing and enjoying where they lived. I was flipping burgers when Tom Henderson approached with a beer and a smile. "Daniel, I know you didn't want to get involved in HOA politics, but thank you. A lot of us were suffering in silence because we didn't know we had options." I just did what any attorney would do when faced with illegal conduct. Most attorneys would have just moved to a different community. You stayed and fixed it. As the sun set on a community that had rediscovered what neighborhood actually means, I thought about what my law school professor used to say. The law is only as good as the people willing to enforce it properly. Brenda had used the appearance of legal authority to control people. But real legal authority comes from following the actual law, not from gavels and violation notices and intimidation. My truck still sits in my driveway on weekends, logo visible, half-ton weight classification clearly not violating any legitimate rule. The package shelf is still next to my front door, holding deliveries without requiring architectural approval. And my townhouse looks exactly how I want it to look, maintained to reasonable standards without someone else's arbitrary aesthetic preferences controlling my choices. 3 months ago, the community voted to make me a permanent member of the Architectural Review Committee. I accepted on the condition that we'd operate transparently, follow the actual bylaws, and treat homeowners with respect instead of suspicion. We've approved 92% of modification requests since then. The 8% we've denied were for legitimate safety or structural concerns, not because someone didn't like the color of a doormat. Last week, I got an email from a homeowner in a different community facing similar problems with an overreaching HOA president. She'd heard about what happened in Meadowbrook Commons and wanted advice. I spent an hour on the phone walking her through the same legal research process I'd used, explaining her rights and encouraging her to stand up to abuse of authority. Because that's what this was really about, not trucks or driveways or violation notices. It was about people understanding that HOA authority has limits, that those limits are defined by law, and that homeowners have rights that can't be violated just because someone with a gavel and a clipboard thinks they're in charge. Brenda Castellano tried to tow my truck from my own driveway because she thought her position gave her unlimited power. She learned the hard way that authority without legal foundation is just bullying with paperwork. And sometimes the person you're trying to bully knows more about the law than you ever will.